Hello everybody, and welcome to Some Patches Required, a show where we hope to educate and entertain you on the ever-turbulent games industry. As always, I am one of your hosts, Zach.
And I am your other host, Aaron.
And before we jump into the kit and caboodle today, or de piste de la résistance, which I don't know if I butchered that, but it doesn't matter. I just wanted to say thank you to all of the returning listeners and the new ones. We appreciate all of you. Welcome. And also, if you wouldn't mind, oh so dearly, we would always appreciate you smashing that subscribe button, following our episode, or sharing us with one of your friends, or as Aaron likes to say, a mortal enemy.
I don't like to discriminate.
What did you say, Aaron? Sorry.
I said I don't like to discriminate.
Oh, yeah. I mean, yeah, we're anti-discrimination here. Mortal enemies and true allies and friends all are accepted within the Some Patches Required community. And on that note, today we are going to be talking about games journalism, or I guess more specifically games media and corporate consolidation, one of our favorite topics to cover here on the show. Aaron, why are we talking about this? What happened outside of, the fun Blizzard getting acquired by Microsoft?
Yeah, so we're talking about corporate consolidation and games media because the world is really rapidly becoming more and more of a nightmare. I'm sure that if you found this show interesting in the past, or if you just managed to hop on, then you have enough of a passing interest in the games industry to be aware of what's going on with some of the Xbox studio closures, as well as, just the industry-wide layoffs in general, a lot of which can be attributed to corporate consolidation. But what you might not be as familiar with is the fact that games media itself is being consolidated in a very similar way. The most recent example of that was a fairly substantial purchase by IGN, where they acquired the Gamer Network to beef up their numbers even more, despite the fact that they were already one of the biggest players in the industry. So now a good handful more websites and more of the internet, and therefore more of the information that you use to make sense of the world, is all coming from the same source. And that would be IGN.
I think the more prominent ones people might know, at least just basing it on what I know, is Rock, Paper, Shotgun was included in that purchase, and so was GamesIndustry.biz. There's some other popular sites, although I saw an article, Aaron, that was suggesting that all of the sites that were in the Bellular video were not actually ones that were fully acquired. It was, I guess, only... Where's my article on it? It was Eurogamer, GamesIndustry.biz, Rock, Paper, Shotgun, and VG247 were the ones that were fully purchased. And then I guess shares in things like Digital Foundry, Outside Xbox, Nintendo Life, Push Square, Pure Xbox, and Time Extension. They only have shares in those latter six.
Yes.
But regardless, as is detailed in this Forbes article, those are four pretty popular. I'm actually not familiar with VG247, if I'll be completely honest with you, but I'm familiar with Eurogamer. I'm familiar with GamesIndustry.biz. Our show uses GamesIndustry.biz quite a bit when we're doing research, and then Rock Paper, of course.
Yeah, GamesIndustry.biz is one of our go-to sources for researching the show. Rock, Paper, Shotgun is one of those how do I want to phrase this? Rock, Paper, Shotgun to me has always been one of the last bastions of voice in games media, where it really does seem like their content is actually authored by people with opinions. And some of their articles have, a bit of a quirk to them or a little bit of an edge, which I've always found very appealing. So I've turned to rock, paper, shotgun for years and years. I do go to VGC 24/7 or VG 24/7 every so often, but it's normally just when it pops up in my feed. But I am familiar with their content as well. And yeah, all of these, not necessarily formerly independent, but formerly slightly more independent groups, all being consolidated under IGN, may not, surprising absolutely nobody, may not actually be a very good thing.
Well, I think the interesting thing here is that there's really there appears to be really 16 main players in the games media space. Some of them more popular than others. But to your earlier point, IGN Entertainment is by far the largest player in the space. A lot of the other players, for example, GameStop, only have like 1 or 2 or 3 sites associated with them. With GameStop, it's obviously one. It's just Game Informer. And so, it's kind of like the publisher space on the development side, where there's really, well, I would say it's actually a little bit better, but barely, than the publisher space on the game dev side. But, on the game dev side, we have Activision, we have Microsoft. We have Microsoft,
Yeah.
we have Take-Two, we have Sony, we have Capcom, we have Konami. I almost said Toonami, very different thing. We
Yeah,
have
very
Ubisoft.
different. Yeah.
I'm struggling.
Bandai Namco.
Embracer Group. You said one I missed.
I think it was Bandai Namco. I think.
Oh yeah. Sorry, Bandai Namco. I mean, there's a few more, but like generally speaking, on the big Nintendo. How did I not think of Nintendo? That's embarrassing.
What is a Nintendo?
What is a Nintendo? Sega. But anyway, my point being is there's not a ton of these big video game publishers. Very similarly to how there are not a ton of these large games media conglomerates in the world that ultimately disseminate all this information. And consolidation is not good for a few reasons that we'll get into. But I think one of the big ones, Aaron, is leading up to this acquisition. I couldn't find an exact number. I was trying to find an exact number, but it sounds like there were quite a bit of I shouldn't say premature, but preliminary. Thank you. Can't talk today. Firings of staff at all of the Gamer Network sites, because if you can't have duplicates of jobs, so redundancy fires happened leading up to this acquisition. And I think the interesting thing that I also learned while doing this whole process is that just generally speaking, in the journalism industry, we are experiencing a period of substantial layoffs.
Yeah. Yes. I think the number that you pulled was just shy of 2,700 layoffs in 2023 and just north of 1,800 in 2022 across the journalism space at large. And to get a little bit more granular with it, I recall you having pulled some numbers for like when National Geographic, I believe, let go of 17 writers.
Yeah, Nat Geo was 17 staff writers.
Yeah, off of an editorial staff of roughly 130, so that's not an insubstantial portion of your editorial staff. The LA Times kicked out 115 employees, or roughly 20% of the news staff. The New York Times dropped about 74 employees, which we found some kind of differing numbers on what the New York Times editorial staff is sized like. So regardless of the outsized impact of 74 layoffs on that team at large, 74 layoffs is still a good number. It's still a lot of people out of a job in one day.
Yeah, and I mean, I think the thing that's important to remember for journalism, based on some of the numbers that we found, is when you look at a larger publication like the New York Times, you'll go on to LinkedIn and you can look at how many employees it has. And I believe when we looked, Aaron, it was maybe like 3,000 to 5,000. I can't remember exactly off the top of
Something
my head.
like that, yeah.
But not all of those people are journalists. You've got support staff, you've got HR, you've got, well, I guess payroll is in HR. But my point being is there's a lot of people in that organization that are not going to have anything to do with journalism directly. My understanding of journalism and just writers' rooms in general is that generally speaking, they are going to be more comparable, if not smaller, than a game studio. So when you're talking about numbers of like even 17, that's a lot. That's a pretty substantial portion of a team being cut. 74 people is a lot in the context of journalism and writers. 115 is a lot, which is illustrated by the fact that the LA Times, when they fired 115 people, I think you maybe already hit on this point. Sorry, 20% of the news staff, which is crazy. And another number that I thought was interesting from the Mars Circle article that we had, Aaron, was the 130 confirmed newspaper closings or mergers in 2023, which is a pretty big number. And then also, I was seeing a lot in these articles just what we're very used to, at least talking about game development, which is comments about being laid off as just being part of the business. It's part of what you go through. Lots of commonalities there with at least being in game development, and the idea that, you're just prepping for your next layoff. I guess actually it was Josh that said that in our last episode.
Yeah. It was like as soon as you get your first industry job, start saving for your first layoff.
Yeah.
Which I thought was kind of a harrowing quote, but still pretty impactful. Yeah. So layoffs are obviously an issue. We've kind of beaten this particular dead horse I can't tell if it's been long enough that we've been beating this. I don't want to keep talking about beating a dead horse. We've been on that topic for a very long time, including past episodes. They're still happening. Clearly, whatever we've said has not fixed the problem. But the then impact of these layoffs to the organizations at large can be not great. I mean, for one, you then take a team and need to stretch them out further. I mean, that's true in game development. That's true in the journalism side of things. But in something as structured as journalism, you do want to make sure that all of the T's are being crossed, the I's are being dotted. The detail work is tremendously important. And if you're trying to produce exceptional quality journalism with a skeleton crew, that is increasingly difficult, I would say, to some degree.
Well, I think to your point, part of it is definitely there's certainly a too many cooks in the kitchen situation that can happen, but we're definitely not at that point in time. So then you get the alternative, which is there's not enough cooks in the kitchen. So how are you going to create quality, running with this analogy, food to serve to people, right? I mean, you don't have enough people. So it's either like some people don't get serviced and you create less content, or you service everyone, but the quality goes down, right? So there's definitely that component. And I think another big thing that I didn't expect to really come up in this discussion is the whole AI angle.
Yeah.
And that's not even just including, certain sites. I think the one that was made fun of for Glorbo was the Portal. I can't remember if that was the name of the site, but there's certain games media sites that instead of hiring writers and, paying people a living wage to make content for you, they use an AI to scrape the internet and basically summarize articles together so that they can get eyeballs. And then, of course, they optimize that for SEO, and then they get advertiser dollars, and that's basically their business model. And that's also something that ultimately threatens, this games journalism space. Is a lot of these companies potentially trying to use AI instead of journalists to come up with content.
Well, yeah. I mean that is where I was actually going to go next. So I'm glad that you took us there. Is that these a lot of these layoffs are symptomatic of a couple of things. One of them is the outsized impact of AI on any sort of written word media. Because to clarify the Glorbo thing real quick, just to explain Glorbo because it's kind of amazing. Um, People on Reddit started to think that there were articles being generated by AI that were gathering their information from Reddit posts, which is definitely a real thing. And if it wasn't before, it absolutely is now, because I think OpenAI and Reddit have an agreement that OpenAI is now going to train on Reddit posts, which is, cool.
I believe they do. I think that was linked in that Bellular video. I
Yes,
didn't
I
dig
believe it
into that
was.
any further, but yeah.
But in this case, some people on the World of Warcraft subreddit started talking about something called Glorbo finally being revealed or about to be revealed, and it would bring vague changes to the game, and then they made up a bunch of other little tiny details. And all of that got scraped up and put into this absolutely egregious AI written article, which has since been taken down, but it's still online and archived somewhere. If you want to read it, it's awful. But yeah, that sort of content is not anything. That's not journalism. That's what happens when you need content to fill out your slate, but you don't want to actually pay your workers to do it. And this whole situation becomes even a little bit messier when you factor in the other element of AI, which is Google's new AI snippets tool or whatnot, their AI summaries that pop up in your search results every time you Google something. Those, can be as inaccurate as any other AI generated content, but more concerningly, they continue Google's crusade to never have you leave the Google homepage, because that's where their advertising links and whatnot are. And that is absolutely, in a lot of ways, crushing traffic that would have originally been, driven to the actual sites where the actual original content was published. But since people can now often get a summary of that content or the answer that they were looking for more quickly without needing to actually click through to a site where advertising money would go through to the writers, the editors, and the people behind the original content, it's just sitting on the Google homepage. So web traffic to an already struggling industry is plummeting as a result of this, which means that advertising dollars are down, which means that more layoffs are likely, and the content itself will probably just get more generic and more inaccurate.
Yeah, I definitely, the thing with Google I think is interesting because I feel like it's I don't know, part of it feels like like it is ripe for some kind of antitrust thing, just because it's such a it's ultimately a move that in a lot of ways, at least in my opinion, kind of destroys the internet in the way that at least we understand it. And I'm not sure that it's necessarily for the better. But the one thing I will say that is I'm a little conflicted on is there are certain things that AI Google tool is helpful for, just because, you look something up, it'll spit it out at the top of your search result. And sometimes it's not something that you like really want to dig into, right? And I think in those cases, that's actually a tool that I'm like, oh, okay, I actually benefited from this. This is something that improved my quality of life and my search experience. That being said, Google is not paying the employee that found that information or,
No.
detailed that information in any way. They're basically just stealing that, and then any revenue that should have gone to that person is not. And I think that's where the issue is I definitely feel like I appreciate some aspects of the tool. I think for me in its current state, it's never going to fully replace going to a GamesIndustry.biz as an example and getting the information. And then also to your point, AI can hallucinate. For those that don't know, AI hallucinations just refers to when AI tell you the wrong information. So for example, the Wow Glorbo example, that is a hallucination of AI because it gave you the wrong information. Because it pulled from, incorrect sources. So, yeah, I mean, there's plenty of issues with it. It's hard for me because I definitely can see the utility of a tool like that, especially if you're looking for like very quick, brief information. It's never going to fully replace an article. But at the same time, I can't help but feel like there's some some kind of legislation that needs to be put in place to prevent Google from not owing any money to sites that originally procure that data. I think that's, it just feels very, it feels like citing something without referencing the source, if I'm being completely honest. And technically, I think they do link to the source, but for all intents and purpose, when it comes to monetary like payout, they're not. And I think that's the real problem.
Yeah. No, I think that is 100% a thing. And I can kind of agree. Like, there are definitely times where I have Googled something frivolous or something that I just need a really quick answer on. And for that, it's not a bad tool to have. I don't know that it's that different from the tools that they used to have, except now it's branded with AI because that's the new hotness some billionaire decided for the rest of us. But I don't know. I can't throw my weight behind it again because I think that there is going to be, at a certain point, an attempt at a great reckoning with all of the potential legal issues going on with AI training models and the impact of those training models as evidenced in Google, right? So content, especially content that was published for the intent to make profit, to contribute to the portfolio of an established brand, right? That content is candidly just being stolen with no sort of repayment even being considered. These AI companies are making money hand over fist by using stuff they did not make. I think that there will end up being a series of very high-profile lawsuits against whichever company they think is going to be the most toppleable, most likely. I'm not sure exactly where the legal people behind the scenes will go with this, but my suspicion is that by the time any sort of legal action is taken in order to curtail the kind of dubious legal and ethical things going on with this, it'll be far too late. I think that battle has already been lost, personally.
I'm trying to see if this was an actual article or if it was something that I hallucinated. But I feel like it was okay. Yeah, here it is. So if you look up on the internet, OpenAI is probably the one that's leading the charge in a lot of ways. But I'm just going to read to you some of the headlines here in regards to this thought that I had. So OpenAI whistleblower describe reckless and secretive culture. Current former OpenAI employees warn company not doing enough control dangers of AI. OpenAI, Anthropic, and Google DeepMind workers warn of AI's dangers. OpenAI employees warn of a culture of risk and retaliation. And then I'll just read one more. OpenAI employees warn of AI's potential existential threat to humanity in letter. Some of these sources are maybe less, I don't know what MSNBC, sorry. Duh. But my point being is, I thought that I saw the other day that there were a bunch of employees from OpenAI kind of talking about the risks and concerns of it. I wasn't sure if I hallucinated that, so I just did a quick Google search, and those are some of the things that I found. So yeah, definitely some concerns about how AI is going to be utilized and the implications of AI in general for society, not just for journalism, obviously, but
yeah. I mean, at the risk of lingering too long in the AI zone, I will say it is still related in a way, because I think, as evidenced by a lot of those headlines, the narrative. think about the juxtaposition between some of those Google Gemini commercials you've almost certainly seen on YouTube, where the kid is singing about a cat playing guitar and the young woman wants to cancel dinner plans with her friends, and it's this jaunty little musical number. The juxtaposition between that and these headlines show that the narrative is not swinging in favor of AI as a technology right now. But that is not stopping its encroachment into every aspect of our lives, because we don't get to make those decisions anymore. Do you know what I mean? So it's not just the AI tools in your phone. It's not just the AI tools in your search engine. It will be the content you read, because as we've seen 1,000 times, and I'm trying to loop us back into the journalism side of things and the consolidation side of things, as we've seen 1,000 times with the just amazing vista of late stage capitalism that we've constructed for ourselves, this sort of consolidation very rarely leads to independent creativity. It usually leads to profit chasing, cost cutting, and homogenization. And this is where we can't get away from AI, is because AI can theoretically proofread. I can definitely hear somebody saying that if you train an AI model well enough, it could edit better than an entry-level employee. And candidly, we're not going to be the ones, as the readers, as the watchers, to make those decisions. The people in the C-suites are going to make those decisions, and we're going to live with the repercussions. The problem is that media, yes, exists to entertain, especially in the game space, but it also exists to criticize. And when the human voice is dramatically reduced or taken out, the power of journalism and media is robbed. And even then, take AI out of it, that is a consistent problem with a lot of media companies being bought out by big conglomerations or trust fund people or Jeff Bezos, where you start to see issues pop up with diversity of opinions, diversity of hires, which can, of course, lead to diversity of opinion issues. And the point being, it's all happening at once. It's all happening very quickly, and none of the results are going to be good.
Well, I think my last thing on the AI part that I just think is interesting, and then you said a few things that I'll try to remember after I say this and hit on, is I think that the interesting thing about AI is, like, if you think about AI in a vacuum outside of like all of the things that are going on, someone expressed this to me the other day and I thought it was really, really cool, or smart rather. It's like, if you had AI that you invented to help you out in life, would you want the AI to wash your dishes and clean your house? Or would you want your AI to, do art for you, or ride the bike for you? Like, things you enjoy, right? Like, my point here, I can't remember the exact examples that they gave, but they were basically saying, like, our approach to AI has been the opposite in a lot of ways. Like, we're replacing the things people enjoy doing with AI, not the things people don't enjoy doing with AI. Like, yeah. And I think that's kind of ultimately the problem, is like, people enjoy writing. People enjoy constructing narratives and constructive criticism and looking, investigative journalism, all this stuff. This is all things people enjoy. These are all jobs that people pursue. These are not things to be optimized out of the human experience. Things like cleaning perhaps could be optimized out. Things like washing your dishes could perhaps be optimized out. But all these other things that are part of the human experience that we actually enjoy, why are we cutting the human out of that? That doesn't make any sense to me.
Why are we also specifically targeting, and I do have a way to relate this into it, why are we specifically targeting the stuff that only humans do? The stuff that only we could do before, right? The stuff that we created. The stuff that, through our imagination, through necessity, we came up with language, and then we found a way to make language beautiful. We found a way to use it to tell stories, to contextualize our lives. We, looked at a weird colored plant, and then that turned into a beautiful painting several steps down the line. Sculpture, all these things that are so sort of intrinsically human. The idea of this creation, those, like you said, are not necessarily things to be optimized out. I'm sure someone out there enjoys doing their taxes. If I could click a button to have my taxes done for me, that would actually be pretty cool.
Yeah.
Do I want... I mean, and granted, I'm never going to be able to draw or, Illustrator or Photoshop a beautiful piece of art on the level of, like, our buddy Courtney Irby. Or a billion AI models. But the AI is not it's you're completely right. I like that sort of point, is that we're not using it to optimize the stuff out that could and maybe should be optimized out. We're using it to eat at the most human elements of society.
Yeah, all in the pursuit of magical advertising dollars.
Yeah, and candidly, that's what it is. It really is in the pursuit of advertising dollars, because if industry can cut creatives who want to be paid out and still get similar results, then suddenly operating businesses becomes much cheaper, and C-suite people can get a lot more money for their yearly bonuses.
Yeah. Well, I think the other thing, it's still talking about concerns with consolidation and whatnot that you hit on, with diversity of opinion, diversity of hire, all these different things. The other thing that kind of gets lost when you have consolidation under a single network like IGN Entertainment, or entity, I should say, like IGN Entertainment, is if that employer is a good employer, then presumably everyone that was part of the acquisition will fall under good, hopefully under good company culture, under good ownership, all this other stuff, right? But it always opens people up to the potential of, a bad kind of consolidation where maybe IGN isn't prioritizing a variety of different opinions, a variety of different voices, diversity in the workplace, all these different things. So you can end up with kind of like homogenized content on all these different sites that ultimately drive whatever the business interest is for the parent company, in this case, IGN Entertainment.
The parent here would be Ziff Davis.
Or Ziff Davis, the Ziffer, yes. And that's equally as problematic to all of these things. And I think on the advertising dollar note, the one thing that was mentioned, at least in the Bellular video, is that guide content, video game guide content, to elaborate more, is apparently the most lucrative kind of content to prioritize. But, hopefully this doesn't offend anyone. I'm sure it might offend some. I don't really think that video game guides are journalism necessarily in the way that it's important. And I don't know what your perspective on this is, Aaron, because, obviously this is a space that you're more passionate about. But I know that games journalism has really suffered visual or appearance wise from the game dev community, because I think a lot of the time it's questioned whether they do actual journalism, whether games journalism is journalism at all. And I think a prioritization of just game guide content would not help kind of dissuade this weird image of the work that games journalists do. So that's kind of another negative of, or I guess talking a little bit more on the decrease in quality, rather.
I would say that the issue there, because I don't think that there are many people who would make the argument that being a dedicated games writer qualifies you as a journalist inherently, right? Especially if your main focus is guides writing. You can dabble in other journalistic stuff on the side, but if you're writing out a list for where I'm supposed to find this specific item in this specific game, or where I find an extra heart container and link between worlds, whatever, that's not journalistic necessarily. But there is, of course, still real good journalism being done in this whole space. I mean, look no further than, I'm sorry to keep doing it, but Jason Schreier's work. He recently released a new report which is similarly to everything else he puts out, immaculately well-researched, well-constructed. The interviews are insightful, and no one else is getting access like this. That is journalism. So the issue with the prioritization of guides content, because conceptually, as a buoy to help keep the rest of the site afloat, if the majority of the traffic is already going to be going to guides, make your money on the guides. I'm fine with that. But when the resources are all allocated to the lucrative one at the expense of diverse opinion pieces, actual reporting, actual journalism, criticism, analysis, that sort of thing, when that takes a demonstrable backseat on the actual website to guide content, that's when we start to see a slip in the actual journalistic integrity of the entire industry, right? Because if everyone's basically just a glorified guides writer, then it would be pretty easy to just write games media off as another wing of the games industry just for advertising. Candidly. But I hope that that's not what ends up happening very badly, because, again, companies like, and IGN definitely does still have its fair share of opinion pieces. I wouldn't say any of them are as insightful as something that you would have seen on Kotaku maybe 6-7 years ago. But it's still there. It's just not as prominent. But yeah, seeing the voices go away in favor of marketable content, I think is a problem. And it's worth remembering that Ziff Davis doesn't care about journalism.
Cares about the money.
Cares about the money. And you don't really need to look much further than... and I realize I'm kind of playing a little bit of a dangerous game here, because these are often companies that I have put job applications towards, a couple of them. So I'm just being honest here. Hopefully that does not reflect too poorly on me in the future. But if you look at the content, the vast majority of content produced by something like Valnet. Zach, I'm not sure how familiar with Valnet you are.
Not particularly. I know the name from looking around. Yeah, Valnet, so I see it. Yep.
Valnet runs what and I did very briefly work for them. I very, very briefly worked for Valnet. And I left partially because I found it very distasteful. They operate what I would call a series of content mills built around cheap freelance labor. They run websites like Screen Rant, Game Rant, and a couple of other ones that don't all have rant in them. But I would say, preponderance of content on any of those sites is regurgitated content, clickbait content, guides, just kind of sloppily written rage bait stuff. And then about 1.5% of it is legitimate, actual good writing and good work being done by people who are clearly in leadership for a reason on the editorial staff. But yeah, their entire business model is to get as many freelancers, army of freelancers, from college students who want to make a couple extra bucks and get a writing credit, to high school students probably who want to make a couple extra bucks and get a writing credit, all the way up to people who are actually, trying, and want to make a career in that space. And they just take all their content and they throw it into a big Trello-esque thing, and then everyone fights over topics. And you have to write like 25 articles a day in order to make anywhere near minimum wage. And it's a completely unsustainable business model, but it works because so many people want to write for games. So Valnet was already doing that pre-AI. I can't imagine that their content quality is going to go up overall in the AI era. But since all of those different publications are all under Valnet and they all play by the Valnet rules, there is a sameness to their content, which I don't think is something I'd like to see happen to like a rock paper shotgun, for instance. And it's something that we've seen some publications kind of buck against in the past. Like, I'm not sure exactly how long ago it was that Kotaku got purchased by Geo Media, but it was around that time that there were some fairly high-profile departures from the company, mostly owing to culture differences and expectations for more of a content farm SEO-y sort of vibe, as opposed to the sort of freewheeling journalism that Kotaku made its name on. So we lost from that site Stephen Totillo, Jason Schreier, a solid handful of other really good, Heather Alexandra, I believe, a couple of other really talented journalists who just scattered to the wind because new ownership was going to change too much at Kotaku for them to feel comfortable adding their names to it journalistically. And that's shocking.
I think from that perspective, they're definitely, with consolidation, change of ownership, all of that, there's always the concern that you'll lose important voices in the space. Like if we lost, Jason Schreier on the games journalism side, I think there's a lot of different exposés that we would not have access to. Some of those that, I think do drive important change. So I think that's definitely a potential impact. And then I have plenty of thoughts on content mills, none of them positive, in terms of, I think that it tends to be exploitative and a bunch of other things. But I don't want to go too much into that because I think the sort of last thing, or at least last main thing that we had, outside of, the ones that we've mentioned with layoffs, people departing or I should say important voices departing the industry entirely, the decrease in content because of all of that, is just like the general closure of certain games media sites entirely. And I know the reason that we wanted to specifically hit on this one was just because that gives us an excuse to talk a little bit about Microsoft, as well as Embracer Group, which... as I'm sure a lot of people know, but maybe not everyone, both of them had been on some pretty big purchasing sprees of different studios. More so Embracer was different studios. Microsoft was more large publishers in the form of Bethesda and, of course, Activision Blizzard, which just happened. But of course,
we were famously kind of on board with Embracer at the beginning.
In a way, I think we were on board potentially with both. But yeah, Embracer was, for me, definitely a frustrating situation because I thought, initially a lot of the news was that Embracer was buying all of these like AA studios. It sounded like Embracer was largely letting them kind of do whatever they wanted with the content and the games that they were creating. And then what ended up happening is Embracer fell into some economic financial woes and started just laying off a ton of people from all of these different game studios, and ultimately ended up closing. Aaron tried to help me find all 7 of them. We were not able to find all 7, but they ended up closing at least 3 game studios, which were Volition, which is, famous for Saints Row, so that's a pretty big one. Free Radical, which made the Time Splitter games, which I've actually never played. And then Campfire Cabal. And I'm pretty sure that they've laid off more than 1,400 employees. That was just the number that came with this Games Radar article. But this article specifically details 1,400 employees laid off, 7 studio closures, and 29 games canceled. Obviously, that's not a exact comparison to games journalism, but it is an example of how one big company gobbles up all these smaller studios. These smaller studios could have been doing completely fine by themselves. They, can be private, doing completely fine, sustainable, happy employees. they're purchased by Embracer Group, and then they're ultimately thrown away. And Embracer gets to keep the IPs to, either sell to someone or, just hoard onto. Similar examples with Microsoft, but I've been talking here for a bit, so I don't want to keep bloviating, but Microsoft ultimately ended up completely closing down Arcane Austin, which was the Redfall team, and I believe also the team that worked on Dishonored. Tango Gameworks, which made Hi-Fi Rush, which I think is an absolutely phenomenal game.
Yes,
that won a lot of awards, God. And then Alpha Dog, who I actually know from my time working at Unity. I was like, I thought that name was familiar. They're a smaller mobile studio in Canada that worked on the Doom mobile game. But yeah, no, just a situation where a bunch of these solid studios that didn't need to die necessarily were just absolutely gutted and canned because their corporate master decided they weren't profitable enough.
Right, because at some level, someone probably wearing a suit, or irritatingly, a sport coat over a graphic tee, decided that the output of that studio did not fit into the company's larger plans for its portfolio, which is sickening in a lot of ways, considering the successes that Arcane Austin had pre-Redfall, the success that Tango Gameworks was riding right up until its closure. And the same can be said for a bunch of other different studios. It is it's surprising, it's shocking, it's upsetting, I would say. And it kind of ties back into, again, something just to media for one more second. The kind of idea with buying a lot of legacy media outlets seems to be from the people who have the money to purchase them, that they're basically just buying the skeleton. They'll pick whatever shreds they can off of it and then throw the rest away. That's the only value they see in it. And it's increasingly starting to feel like maybe that's what's going on in games as well, to some degree, where these studios are being bought, they're providing some value, and then they're just being discarded.
And I think the frustrating thing too that pisses me off, and I think this is related to some game sites, because I know, or at least I think some of the YouTube series are owned by. Yeah, because IGN has a YouTube channel. My point being is, I can't remember which was Brian David Gilbert with Kotaku.
Polygon.
Polygon. And he had his show that he was doing, and what I think's really, and then obviously he left. I'm just using this more as an analogy, but there's all this IP that people legitimately enjoy quite a bit, and I think what's really frustrating to me is Arcane Austin let go. I think there was rumors that they were working on the next Dishonored game or trying to pitch it. And Dishonored is a good franchise. There's two of them.
Yeah.
They both are generally beloved. And now we just have to wait and see if Microsoft thinks that is a franchise worth using, because they own the IP for it, even though they canned the studio functionally after buying it. They still get the IP. And I think that's kind of the thing that ultimately pisses me off the most about a lot of this is I think that there should be more of a repercussion in some form for your bad purchase decisions. I don't think you should just be able to gobble up a bunch of IP, can the people that made it and the studio that made it or the website that made it, and, just hoard it functionally. Because that's what you see a ton, I feel like, from a lot of companies, is they just hoard IP until they suddenly think it'll be valuable. And then they decide to do something with it. Meanwhile, all the people that actually are passionate about and enjoy that are either laid off, or if you're a fan, you just kind of sit there, waiting for someone to use the IP, and they just don't. And I think that's I don't know. That's a little bit off topic from some of the games media stuff that we've mentioned, but it is something that I just find really frustrating with a lot of the consolidation that's been happening.
No, I completely agree. I think I mean, ultimately, at the end of the day, the only people who come out unscathed, except for a few negative headlines, are the ones up top, right? Because they cost of doing business. Yeah, just fire 2,000 people, no big deal. I've got a shiny new Dishonored. That it's a great mentality. I love it.
Yeah, no, it is. It's definitely all. It's definitely all a bit of a mess, and I see what time we're at. So we're actually not going to, at least in this episode, maybe in a future episode, we'll talk a little bit about, some of the proposed solutions, only because I think some of them are not really great ultimately. The only one that I'll allude to is, journalists all kind of making their own like Patreon-esque like newsletters. Like I get why I 100% love the flexibility of that, but just all the subscriptions that we already have, the idea of having to pay another subscription, especially for like our show where having access to free information is invaluable. Like I don't want to have to pay for all of my information. I think fundamentally that in and of itself goes against journalism to have paywalls between people and information. I don't know. I think that's just my opinion maybe, but I think it's kind of messed up. But anyway, there's a lot of interesting opinions, or rather ways that people are kind of approaching trying to maintain a career in games media if, they've been impacted by this consolidation and just kind of the general instability of journalism in general. And that could maybe be something interesting to talk about at another point, but I digress.
Yeah. I mean, for my money on that, just briefly, I really doubt that the pitch on a journalist's OnlyFans sort of subscription style writing thing is going to be sustainable long term. Do you know what I mean? Like that kind of content, it just doesn't sell as well as, I mean, it's why we're in this situation. is because of the profit motivations, and that sort of thing is probably just not sustainable. But yes, we have arrived at the terminus point of the conversation. Thank you so much for joining us, and also a huge thank you to Beach Girl. Beach Girl is the provider of our wonderful intro and outro music, as well as a plethora of other tunes you can find just about anywhere great digital music can be procured. That'd be your Spotify's. Price is going up on that one again, by the way. Let's see if Beach Girl gets a bigger cut. Then also, I'm sure YouTube, SoundCloud, Bandcamp, Napster, MySpace, Grooveshark. Yeah, basically anywhere good digital music can be found, you can find Beach Girl, and you should. It's good stuff.
And if you're looking for some spicy art, I actually don't know that she makes spicy art, but if you're looking for some emotionally fulfilling art, you should always make sure to check out eDougie Art. eDougie Art is, of course, the wonderful friend of ours that made our beautiful logo, album art, and all of that jazz. We appreciate her dearly, and her magical art can be found on both Etsy and Instagram under the same handle, which is eDougie Art. So make sure to show both eDougie and Beach Girl some love. We appreciate it. We appreciate any support you can give to them. And of course, thank you for tuning in and listening to us ramble about random stuff. And by random stuff, I guess I mean games journalism today. Whether this is your first or second or third or I don't know, umpteenth episode, we appreciate you for coming back.
Always, always.
And with that, I will bid you all adieu. Goodbye.
The world is really rapidly becoming more and more of a nightmare.